Dharavi, as you know, is one of the largest slum in the world and the largest slum in Asia, spread over more than 600 acres prime land in the heart of the country's commercial capital, Mumbai. It has around more than 8 lakh residents, and moving population takes it to nearly a million.
Now, based on my colleague and ET's veteran real estate reporter Kailash Babbar's estimate, this is more than the population of several countries in the world, like Bahrain or Fiji, for example. But there's another way to look at it. Nearly 50% of the population of Mumbai, a megapolis of dreams, live on 6% of its land, making it among the most congested in the world, with over 57,000 shanties, huts, chawls, small flats, several of which are illegal, within a 2.1 square kilometer radius. And it has taken the authorities almost 4 decades to figure out a rehabilitation program for Dharavi, announced just last week.
Delays over the last 15 years, one of Asia's largest slum clusters is set for a facelift. The Adani Group has won the rights to redevelop Dharavi with a 5,067 crore rupee bid. The Maharashtra government aims to finish the project in the next 17 years. Shilpa Ranipeta is here with more. Shilpa.
Well, the redevelopment project of Mumbai's Dharavi, which is one of the largest slum clusters in Asia, has now gone to the Adani Group. Now, there were 3 bidders in total, of which Adani and DLF qualified.
In some of these Byzantine bylanes and squalid blocks like Narsingh Chawl, Indira Nagar, Muslim Nagar, or 90 Feet Road, from where we are recording this show, the approximate human density can go up to 2,000 per acre. So forget space. Even basic sanitation and sunlight find it tough to come through in several of these parts. Honestly, this does not look like the home for hope or of any slumdog millionaire, but gully boys who struggle most days for basic sustenance. From the original fishermen who inhabited Dharavi when it was an island, to the Tamil, Bihari or Malayali immigrants who settled thereafter, from the Uriya and UP bhaiyas who sweat it out in the small shops and factories, or drive cabs, or deliver your pizzas and groceries in minutes, to the Maharashtrian families who make pickles, apparels, and farsans that get exported to the world over, Dharavi remains an universe unto itself. A spirit that's both resilient and rebellious, multicultural and ethnically diverse. But let's break it down even further. What makes for a slum? Is there a singular definition for it? Professor Amita Bhide from the Center of Urban Planning and Governance helps us understand.
So there is a census definition of a slum.
Okay.
And the census definition of a slum is basically a settlement which is of more than 30 households, largely temporary dwellings. And it either has to fulfill the parameters of having temporary dwellings or poor basic services, or it has to be administratively declared or notified by the relevant authorities. So the census definition is a very administration contingent definition. The more legal definitions can actually be found in the Slum Clearance Act, and which again emphasizes it doesn't talk about the number of dwellings, but it definitely talks of shacks, or it talks of crowded housing, dense housing, and which can create a hazard for health. The Slum Clearance Act went so far as to say that this kind of poorly serviced, overcrowded neighborhood is also one which can be a moral hazard. So this was in the 1956 definition. Since then, the morality of it, we have kind of gotten over. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, we have to also remember that always aesthetics have determined what is a slum. So in the past in Mumbai, even areas with what today may be called as permanent buildings like Kamakipura, but which are overcrowded neighborhoods, have also been called slums. Okay? It is in the 1970s that the focus shifted to what are called the shacks or the jhuggi jhopris, per se, as part of slums. So the definition of a slum can be very broad,
Right.
but the way it is applied. And now in Mumbai, we have a very interesting shift, and where we don't even call a declared slum. We say a slum rehabilitation area, which gives the slum rehabilitation authority the power to declare a area as a slum rehab area. Now that within that slum rehab area, there could be slums,
Mhm.
but there could also be non-slum areas. For example, there might be municipal chawls, which have a perfectly legal tenure, and they may be made of more permanent housing materials, but they may be part of a slum rehab area. In fact, to me, the slum represents a solution to several of the inadequacies of the formal housing market in Mumbai.
Originally envisaged by Rajiv Gandhi in 1985 as part of a larger push to improve the infrastructure of the financial capital, when Vasant Dada Patil was the Maharashtra Chief Minister, the plans to redevelop Dharavi, the primest of prime real estate adjoining the central business district of Bandra Kurla complex, has been one of unfulfilled promises. Truth be told, it's very similar to what's happening all around the world. From the favelas of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro to the informal settlements of Johannesburg, South Africa, says Raquel Rolnick, a Brazilian architect and urban planner, a key aide to President Lula during his first term from 2003 to 2007, who later went on to become a special rapporteur in the United Nations on the right to adequate housing.
I would say India, South Africa, and Brazil have many, many, many things in common. Most of the land, and this is still like that until now, in China belong to the municipalities. So that changes completely the dynamic. In
Correct.
India, in South Africa, in Brazil, most of the land is private.
Yes.
Most of the land, you have public land involved as well, but it's very different from the experience of China or the experience of Singapore, where the land, the whole land of the whole city is public. So
Yes.
the possibilities of playing with that is very different. But having said that, now the newest scheme, which is Dharavi is part of, but not only Dharavi, but the new Indian way of dealing with self-built settlements, which are public-private partnerships.
And that is exactly the template this time around.
This time now, the government is now looking at developing this project through a joint entity as an integrated township, wherein the selected lead partner, which is Adani Group now, is expected to hold 80% equity, which is 400 crore, and the state government will bring in 20%, that is 100 crore equity capital. The pre-bidding meeting that took place on October 11th saw a total of 8 entities showing interest, some from Middle East, also a South Korean company. But finally, we saw only 3 of them bidding for it. Now, the selected entity will create an SPV along with the government, and this joint entity will be responsible for construction of free housing for eligible slum dwellers and occupants, including amenities and infrastructure around the entire zone.
Okay.
And this is expected to be completed within 7 years from the date of issuance of first commencement certificate to the first phase. While the government is very keen to get this started off within 6 months, and they're also looking to complete the entire rehab part in 7 years, and the sale process, whatever Adani or the selected bidder builds and he wants to sell in the market, that process also needs to be done in the next 17 years. The government has also announced an FSI of 4 for redevelopment portion, along with several concessions given to the bidder in the form of premium paid by them or inspection charges, goods and services tax, etc.
It's Tuesday, 6th of December. You're listening to Dharavi's new Dada on the Morning Brief. From the Economic Times, I'm your host, Arijit Burman. In this episode, we will get Kailash to talk about what's the grand plan to revive Dharavi, a city within a bigger city. And also understand from Professor Bhide why this is actually a bigger push to revive the economy of our maximum city, and how it takes elements from the past to set the tone for the future. And last but not the least, why, as Raquel Rolnick, our special guest who joins us all the way from Sao Paulo, Brazil, argues that it is absolutely important to keep the ethos or typology of Dharavi intact, even as we raise buildings and dreams to the ground to build new modern structures by involving the locals in the entire rehab process. After all, these are spaces where people do not just sleep at night or cook during the day, but share their life's key moments with many, many others. Before we move ahead, let's go back to when it all started and take it from where Rajiv Gandhi left off in 1985.
Then he initiated the Prime Minister Grant Project, which was known as PMGP, in 87. And MADA was declared as a special planning authority for Dharavi.
Mm-hmm.
Under that project, around 27 buildings with a number of houses were built. Later on, after the year 1995, when I think Shiv Sena BJP government came to the power, under the slum rehabilitation scheme, 86 schemes were approved in Dharavi up to the period of, say, 2004. Then in 2003 and 4, the government of Maharashtra decided to redevelop Dharavi as an integrated planned township in the middle of the city. And an action plan for this implementation of Dharavi redevelopment was approved in February 2004.
Mm-hmm.
It was then decided to redevelop it by using land as a resource to cross-subsidize the cost of development through sale of component on the basis of SRA scheme by dividing it into sectors and appointing developers for the same.
Mm-hmm.
The government also decided to notify entire Dharavi as undeveloped area and to appoint a special planning authority for planning and development of this entire zone.
Interesting.
Most of these schemes were SRA along the major developed roads of Dharavi, and no major SRA or slum rehabilitation schemes were proposed in the interior part of Dharavi. It's huge, more than 600 acres. So due to inadequate access and also due to the presence of large number of commercial and industrial units in it. So mind you, almost 6,500 SME units are functioning in Dharavi. These SME units who export their stuff to even Paris, New York, all these kind of locations. And Dharavi informally has around $1 billion worth of revenue coming out of it.
Wow.
So all of these obviously have their government need to have their interests aligned along with the development plan.
Absolutely.
And most of these schemes then were scattered throughout Dharavi, and buildings were coming up in sporadic manner along the existing road. 2003 and 4, the government of Maharashtra decided to redevelop Dharavi as an integrated planned township. The government also decided to notify entire Dharavi as undeveloped area and to appoint a special planning authority for planning and development of this entire zone.
Interesting.
And then we did see MADA coming in and government deciding that entire Dharavi will be divided into 5 sectors, and one sector will be redeveloped by MADA and the other 4 by private entities. But MADA went ahead with its planning because the market conditions were not good. Other developers did not participate, so it did not go through at all.
Even during COVID, the state government tried to push the scheme through.
In the middle of COVID, we saw 2 companies, government floated the global tender, and the 2 companies, including Adani Group and Dubai-based Seckling Group. They showed interest in this project, and Seckling finally emerged as the highest bidder. However, that tender was also scrapped in October 2020 by the government, citing a reason of unavailability of railway land spread over 45 acres. Now, these 45 acres land parcel is key to the entire project because the government is planning to develop transit homes here on these 45 acres, because residents may not wish to go, far, and they would like to stay in the same area while their buildings are getting ready.
Interesting.
So new plan has now sorted out this railway land issue and included in the project. And this entire redevelopment is now ready to go ahead with its cost of around 20,000 crore.
But for many, it still is odd that a gold mine like Dharavi, right at the heart of the city, had so few bidders in 2022 in the first place.
Redevelopment and rehabilitation projects usually involve a lot of management of people.
Yeah.
When a developer gets into a project, he's either buying a land parcel from someone and then getting into it, or in Mumbai, redevelopment for a housing society, they'll deal with say 100, 200, 250 home buyer people who are living there. Or even a slum project, at the max 2,000, 5,000 people, 10,000 people. Here, we're talking about lakhs of people, almost going up to 1 million. So I think this requires a different kind of skill set and ability and also willingness, because that kind of time that you need to do this, a normal developer might just complete 3-4 projects in that time and that money. The project has been in the planning stage for nearly 2 decades. Last time also, when Seclink won the rights, the project went into litigation. Finally, they didn't get it. It's a very complex and challenging project involving so many stakeholders. Everybody does not have the bandwidth to manage bandwidth and also willingness to spend that kind of time and energy to manage the pulls and pressures of such a magnitude.
Yeah.
It's the largest urban renewal project in the world. It took nearly 15 years to just complete the project's bidding process. And the timelines that we are talking about now are the timelines that have been given by the government. One does not know how much time actually it's going to take.
Mind you, 5,000 odd crore rupees is what Adani has bid for, but the actual Dharavi project is much, much bigger. Maybe even 4 times that quantum.
This 5,000 crore is what Adani has bid. But the entire project will be around 20,000 crore because they'll also be raising funds. We may see Adani become a master planner and may bring in other developers also to develop smaller parts. So he may say a 10-acre plot or maybe a 50-acre plot is being carved out and let's do it through a JV.
Understood. Details are sketchy still, but it's obvious that the lion's share of the project will deal with plush offices and condominiums.
Adani Group has not provided any information as yet as to what exactly the master plan will be like. But a lot of people who are putting in estimates or trying to figure out what can be done, it's huge. And more than 600 acres you have, and you have all, Bandra, Mahim, Sion, all these established localities around for residential. Plus you have BKC, which is adjacent, which is a business district. So it's bound to happen that the company will develop more swanky office district closer to BKC, and the rehabilitation component will be put in one side as a one zone, and the rest of the land that they have will be used for either aspirational luxury or even mid-income housing.
But what about the inhabitants of Dharavi? What kind of housing will they be given? What about the facilities?
For this project particularly, that has not been mentioned as yet, but people on the ground in Dharavi have been told that they'll get at least a 1-bedroom apartment or a house that they have in the locality. And this will be around, say, 400, 425 square feet or so. And more than that, I think apart from the housing, what they're going to gain is it will be a formal and organized where people get clean water, better hygiene, sewage, planned roads, better infrastructure, schools, places of worship. All of those things will be taken care of. It will be a formalized colony, a settlement.
Let's get back Professor Bhide at this point, because I want to know if this model of redevelopment is the best in class for all stakeholders concerned. As we said before, Dharavi is a city within a city with 85 nagars within. And currently, in many cases, it's the 3rd generation of inhabitants who not only live together but work together as well in this complex fabric of urban jungle.
For a substantive section, a secure housing, a pakka housing is definitely a matter of aspiration. I think the current terms of redevelopment, which talk about a house of 450 5 square feet for every eligible household is certainly a step in that direction, because what it means is that you can have a decent 1 bedroom hall kitchen plus the internal toilets and bathrooms, kind of a self-contained tenement. But on the other hand, there are a lot of changes that redevelopment also means for the settlements. So the first of these is that currently all settlements are a euphemism for different kinds of affordances that the slum gives to multiple kinds of people. Like I said, as of now, the current Dharavi houses informal industry, migrant workers, very, very vulnerable, even destituted kind of people, plus lower middle class households. So there is really a variety of people whose housing needs, including short term needs, are accommodated by the slum. In fact, to me, the slum represents a solution to several of the inadequacies of the formal housing market in Mumbai, which has become very inelastic, very rigid in its entire provisioning of housing supply. Now, within this, if we see what redevelopment does, is it creates singular categories. So, households which may be settled, who are lower middle class, who have a fairly settled livelihood and economic stability, they will definitely be able to hold on to the assets which are being created through the redevelopment process. They will, in fact, benefit from this process. But on the other hand, there are going to be categories like the migrant workers, like people who stay on rents, who are most likely going to be just displaced from the project. Okay. There will be no benefits for them at all. Neither are they included in the benefit, plus the dynamics of redevelopment push them out.
And this is a large chunk.
This is a fairly large chunk. In fact, it is such a large chunk, not just in Dharavi, but one can say this with confidence with respect to several of the slum redevelopments which are happening in Mumbai. That what slum redevelopment manages to do is basically it houses a few people, around 50% or so. But on the other hand, it pushes out roughly 33 to 40% people, and which then go sometimes out of the city as well to create new settlements.
A model that, if implemented, will successfully become the prototype for others, not just in Bombay, but elsewhere in the country too, from Ahmedabad to Bangalore, from Kolkata to Bhopal.
So I think perhaps one needs to see this as part of an entire push for an economic revival for the city. And there are 3 big projects we are seeing in the pipeline. Dharavi is one of them. One is the BDD Chawl's redevelopment, and whose tenders and processes have also been begun. The other very big scale of redevelopment that one is seeing in Mumbai is that on the western front, which is linked to the Patra Chawl and the entire what is called Motilal Nagar. The Motilal Nagar redevelopment is also a very, very big project of redevelopment. This is Goregaon West. A lot of this also depends on Dharavi, because I think Dharavi has been held off for a variety of reasons for such a long time. Perhaps it also adds to the confidence of the entire industry. Plus, it is also a matter of unfulfilled promises. There are several, I think, sentiments and factors which get associated with Dharavi redevelopment.
Bombay has already seen the mill lands of central Mumbai give way to luxury apartments and the original inhabitants, that is the mill workers, getting pushed to the margins. The worry, therefore, is that this script too might play out exactly the same way.
I think compare mills redevelopment with Dharavi redevelopment is perhaps wrong. It is wrong both in terms of the process in which it happened and also the scale at which it happened. Firstly, the mill workers are a fairly organized kind of a group, as opposed to the slum dwellers who are highly fragmented. Fragmented because of the policies of the state, which talk about different eligibility years, land ownerships, and so on. There are multiple reasons why they are fragmented. The second thing that one needs to keep in mind is that the mill lands, these are fairly large chunks of land. And within this, definitely there has been a difference between the assurances given and what has actually been delivered. On the other hand, if you look at slum redevelopment per se, you already have some people who are made eligible. There are lots of activities also which become ineligible. For example, I said earlier that Dharavi is a commercial settlement. There are lots of industries here: garment, leather, then you have textiles, you have bag making, you have several kinds of repair and recycle industries. Now, how are these industries going to be accommodated in the redevelopment process? There is some discussion in the redevelopment policy of creating work centers. But I can perhaps say with some confidence that all of these industries, it's going to be impossible to accommodate them. Not just that, but building control rules will mean that industries like the recycling industries, especially, are going to be completely pushed away.
It's almost as if the state is absolving its responsibilities from the basic duties that it is providing: housing, sanitation, education, healthcare, or even water.
I completely agree with this. Not just that, but even housing is being given basically because you're able to cross subsidize it through the market profit. You're trying to kill multiple birds with one stone. So the government doesn't have to spend from its pocket. It is the developer who's spending it. Developer does it basically because very few premiums. I mean, you look at a 400-acre land
At the heart of the city,
central Mumbai, with so much development potential and development rights being given to you by the state, and developer is getting this, right? So the cost of resettlement, even excluding that cost, there is going to be tons of profit. Plus, all this scale of redevelopment processes also generate significant monies so that it can also sustain the back channels of our political economy. And it is this which is tempting to the state. The cost of it is all the other aspects linked to what welfare for those who are vulnerable could be, gets completely neglected.
right?
So housing becomes seen as the primary need, whether livelihood gets neglected, where food needs and food security gets neglected, health gets neglected, education gets neglected.
So, are we to expect widespread opposition?
In 2006, when Dharavi redevelopment was announced for the first time, it generated a lot of resistance. I think a lot of water has flown under the bridge since then. There may have been a whole lot of dynamics, right? Which is on ground gentrification processes, perhaps, which may have happened. So there are a lot of migrant workers, tenancies in Dharavi. Now, these people have also never been recognized, and it is very likely that they will never pose a resistance as well, because there is a whiff of redevelopment and the structure owners will drive them. Okay. So, on ground resistance prospects now seem to be thin. Okay. So, I think this time the government has taken a lot of factors on board and already introduced some of these within the overall terms of redevelopment. For example, one ticklish point for several years has been where would transit accommodations be, and the presence of the railway land within Dharavi. But I hear now that the negotiations with the railway have already been done. Railway is part of the agreement. Informal industries associations, which had posed a significant amount of resistance in the last redevelopment declaration. I see that in the current terms of redevelopment, there are plans for activity centers. As I said, activity centers are not going to suffice, but these might be enough to ward off the active opposition of some of these associations, or maybe even fragment some of these industries. And therefore, I think it is not definitely not going to be smooth sailing, because a project of this nature with the considerable diversity on ground, as I said, 85 nagars, distinct communities, distinct built environments, distinct tenures, distinct sets of people, it's definitely not going to be easy.
Even though the people of the asphalt and the people of the hill live closely intertwined throughout the city, they live vastly different lives. These informal communities that look like houses stacked on top of each other, sprouting out of the jungle, are called favelas, home to both vicious drug gangs as well as some of the most peaceful, creative, and resourceful people in Rio.
Like a monster, like a monster.
For someone like Raquel, who has worked across emerging markets and cities, public policies around affordable housing has evolved over 5 decades and have periodically taken center stage in cities that host mega global events like the Olympics or the World Cup. Cleaning the urban skyline then becomes almost a national mission, often at the cost of livelihoods and lodging.
The first generation of those policies were basically based on public interventions from the city administration in the provision of water networks, sewage network, schools, open spaces, and all that provided by public authorities. And this is still in place. I'm not telling about a phase that it ended.
Correct.
I'm talking about the real estate financial complex, which rules our cities. And when it's very close to an area which has big interest involved, and then we can give the examples in Brazil and in South Africa, the operations of changing and urban renewal in cities related to the organization and transformation of cities to receive Olympics or to receive the World Cup, they meant massive evictions.
Correct.
And that was the case in Johannesburg, in South Africa. And that was the case in Brazil, in Rio, for instance, with the Olympics and the World Cup in the same city. Evictions, and taking people very far away from the place they used to live. But of course, this is ongoing. It's ongoing in many, many, many cities. But there is a lot of resistance from the people. There is a lot of resistance from the dwellers, but also from entities, organizations saying, okay, this is not the right of the city. Resettlement in a very far away place is not a real adequate in terms of the right to housing. So that has a lot of tension.
Naturally, experts have polarizing views on the approach and strategy.
One position is, let's redevelop in situ, but let's change completely the typology, the morphology, the way the space is organized, replacing the cottages and the self-built structures that were built by the people themselves by housing projects with several stories, let's say apartments. And there is another position which tries hard to maintain the typology. What is the discussion between the two? To maintain the typology and at the same time to increase the quality is very difficult because it's very difficult to do any sort of work in urbanization without at least chirurgical evictions and resettlement in order to open space, in order to open air. And of course, the solution of building apartments is a solution that can provide you with much more densities in order to accommodate those huge numbers.
Correct.
But the problem is that those typologies of apartments have nothing to do with the way people organize around space.
In a country like Brazil, that is also part of the famous BRICS Club of Nations, such schemes are bankrolled either through government subsidies when the left-centric president like Lula is in power, or through market-linked credit mechanisms when right-wing forces win elections.
Housing policy has been a business between the construction industry and the finance industry.
Yes.
Has been always how to finance a massive production of new housing and how make people access to credit in order to buy those homes. So this has been historically the policy around different governments. With Lula, with much more subsidies in order to poor people be able to access. With Bolsonaro, with less subsidies, only market, and credit.
Understood.
In terms of urbanization of settlements, in situ urbanization, during Lula administration, there was a big program of intervention in favelas, but this program depended a lot in the projects that were designed by the different municipalities or states.
The public-private policy, too, thrives on what Raquel calls the financialization of the real estate market, excess liquidity getting channeled into a new asset class.
So those public-private partnerships that are being designed, they have this logic. The idea is, well, Dharavi is too much well located to be housed by those poor guys, by this small industry. So let's make this land, this asset, go into its value. So let's take out part of this land from the people, promote those rent-seeking landscapes, corporate towers, shopping malls, international hotels, which are the morphologies that have this very important role in the financial circuit of capital. And with the rest of the land, let's pack the people in several stories, buildings with several stories, and so they can live there. These are the newest trend of urbanization of settlements. And India is one of the countries which is leading these initiatives.
But how do you balance equity with growth?
What I'm arguing here is that we need air, we need water, we need sewage in urban settings, in dense settings. Yes, but the way we can achieve that, it's not necessarily to transform completely the setting. So I think, and I believe, and I have seen several experiences and projects where it was possible to intervene, to ameliorate the conditions, to ameliorate infrastructure without changing radically, destroying radically.
Such as?
many experiences, for instance, in Favela Bairro, in Colombia, in many, many experiences, I would say also here in São Paulo, in many interventions in favela. This is absolutely possible.
Understood. So what you're saying, in effect, is in order to open up spaces, there will be some amount of reconstruction,
Yes.
some amount of, breaking down of structures, etc.
Yeah,
But
always.
do not resettle everyone or send them packing in houses which look like boxes.
Yeah.
That is what your prescription is.
Yes, and more than that, the right to adequate housing. Let's talk about that. I was the special rapporteur in the right to adequate housing to the Human Rights Council, UN Human Rights Council, from 6 years, from 2008 to 2014. And during my term, during my mandate, a lot of people came to ask me, what is adequate? How many square meters? What kind of material? What kind of... And I say, listen, adequate housing, it's not possible to say how many meters on what is the material. This is not the question. Adequate housing is a sort of a portal that can, from that point, provide to the families, to the individuals, to the communities, access to adequate job, to adequate environment, to adequate transportation, to adequate economic opportunities, and all that. So this is a combination of several aspects. So when you take a family which uses its space as a place which is also a source of income, and you put this family in a small apartment where it will be impossible to add more space in the future. It will be impossible to work. This is not adequate. You are violating the right to adequate housing when you do that. So that is the question. The question is how to take housing, not, again, let's talk about those models. Why we should separate forever work and house. We can combine that. We can combine in a way that is also healthy.
My take. From its literature to theatre, from its cricket to cinema and even hip-hop, Dharavi is in Bombay's collective consciousness.
सुनारेला दास्तान दिस इज धारावी मेरी जान फटेला पर्दा है लो स्टॉल का सीट है धारावी का पिक्चर बड़ू फिर भी सुपर हिट है हिट है
तेरे को निकलना है इधर से साला दम घुटता है मेरा ही
कपड़े सिलाए ले खुद के दम पे नहीं लिए मैंने अपने बाप से
But what makes the place unique is not the stories of despair, but that of desire. And it's the people who live there that make it happen. They are the backbone of the city. From maids to cab drivers, to small merchants and wholesalers, to our security guards. Push them away to the fringes, and it will be us who will suffer even more. Plush, gentrified ghettos that steadily take control of public spaces are commonplace in central Mumbai and several of her suburbs. Even in Dharavi, one hears people who stayed between 2000 and 2011 will be given new houses only at the cost of construction. Those living prior to that will get a one-bedroom apartment almost guaranteed. But the tenants who are there post-2011 may not be that lucky. As we have seen in Latin America, there is a middle path, one that is more equitable and retain the soul using modern urban planning and architectural tools. One must strive for that. You have been listening to Dharavi's new Dada on the Morning Brief with me, Arijit Burman. Thanks, Raquel, Professor Bhide and Kailash. Deeply appreciate it. But before we leave, we wanted to leave you with some more voices of Dharavi, including its famous son, the popular beatboxer Tony Sebastian, also known as Dopedelics.
कारपेट एरिया अगर अच्छा दे देगा तो गरीब लोग का भला हो जाएगा, और नहीं तो अगर इधर उधर उठा के फेंकेगा, मालूम पड़ा उधर जाओ उधर शिफ्टिंग दिया है। हम लोग 50 साल से रहते, 60 साल से रहते, समझे, हमारी 2 पीढ़ी इधर ख़त्म हो गई है। अगर यहाँ ही मिलेगा दुकान कमर्शियल का तो अच्छी बात है।
धारावी छोड़ के अगर हम यहाँ से अगर गवंडी चले जाएंगे तो गवंडी में यहाँ में बहुत फ़र्क है रेट में। अगर गवंडी में रूम दिया तो एक्सेप्ट नहीं करेगा। अगर घर है, धारावी में घर है तो धारावी में ही देगा तो होगा।
कमर्शियल वाला जो मामला है, अब बिजनेस करना है ना तो उसको रोड पे ही देना चाहिए। और जो कारखाने कमर्शियल में, मतलब यहाँ पे 3-3 महल्ले में कारखाने ही चल रहे हैं, तो उसका भी कुछ मामला हल होना चाहिए।
जगह नहीं दे सकते उसको पेमेंट ही दे दो, वो पैसा लेके चले जाएगा। जहाँ पे 50 लाख मिलना चाहिए वहाँ पे अगर 60 लाख मिल गया तो लेके आराम से आदमी चले जाएगा। मगर ये बोलेगा कि नहीं 50 का हम 10 दे दे 20 दे दे तो एक्सेप्ट नहीं होएगा। घर एक बार चलेगा कि यहाँ पे घर है, माहिम में दे देगा, चल जाएगा। लेकिन जो फैक्ट्री है वो फैक्ट्री उठा के बोलेगा मानखुर्द में दे दें, जो करोड़ों का फैक्ट्री है वो अगर वहाँ 20-30 लाख रुपए का देगा तो कुछ एक्सेप्ट करेगा नहीं।
इट विल टेक अ लॉन्ग टाइम बिकॉज मैं धारावी में था, धारावी में ही पैदा हुआ, फिर मैं लेबर कैंप शिफ्ट हुआ। तो मतलब मैं जब से लेबर कैंप शिफ्ट हुआ तब से मैं सुन रहा हूँ कि धारावी इज़ गोइंग टू रीडेवलप, क्योंकि धारावी से इट्स नॉट ओनली लाइक लिविंग ओवर हियर बट इवन व्हेन यू गो आउट, व्हेन यू से दैट यू आर फ्रॉम धारावी, you somewhere not, you are not treated the same way like others, you know, अरे धारावी का है वैसा हो जाता है। Maybe like tomorrow if the place is developed over here, maybe that's a social thing that will also change in the society. నీలంని రెంగలూరుమై పోరాడుவோம் எங்கள் வறுமை ஒளிய போராடுவோம் புது புரட்சி உருவாக்க போராடுவோம் எங்கள் தலைமுறை காக்க போராடுவோம்.
This episode was produced by Sumit Pandey, who also did all the ground reporting from the heart of Dharavi. Indranil Bhattacharya was the sound engineer. Executive producers Anupriya Bahadur, Anirban Chaudhary, and yours truly. We hope you liked this episode. Do share on your social media networks. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursdays, and Friday, and is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and Google Podcasts, as well as JioSaavn. Do tune in to ET Play, our latest platform for all audio content, including The Morning Brief. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits mentioned in the description.